Okay, welcome back. I'm going to be trying to fix these pesky bugs that have been giving me headaches. Hopefully, or no, not real headaches, which is good. Now, we've got to just fix the flow of our enter press in every movement event. So, it's not so much our movement event 2, because we're doing our capstone crush function here. It's that when we're not needing that capstone crush function that it's kind of messing up, because there's just more things we can do by the time enter is pressed. So first of all, we're swapping our players if we've got 0 occupants in our hands, because that would mean we dropped all of our stones. Otherwise, else if we're off grid and our occupants are 1 and we're holding only a capstone, then we toggle off grid to be false so that we can the off-grid false is allowing us to become not illegal by the time we move this. Yeah. Then we're asking if we are not off-grid and we have 0 occupants in our hands and enter is pressed, then we're just going to swap players because we dropped all of our stones. Now, isn't this the same as occupants 0? I feel like we don't need this, because if we have 0 occupants, then it already would have been taken care of. I guess let's see what we do different, if anything. We don't do anything different. We do everything. We update our stack control, stone control, we become occupied, and then we flush our legal move highlight. I guess we're not actually doing that. Right here, I'm gonna say up here. You know, if our movement origin doesn't have any stones anymore, then we actually just flush our legal move highlight and become not occupied in that space. Gotta be a better way of doing that. But other than that, I think we can get rid of this whole chunk. And then we're asking if we've dropped a stone and we aren't off grid, meaning we're able to move and we've dropped at least 1 stone, then go ahead and advance the movement event. So let's see if our movement event 4 is crashing or if it is not crashing. Well, we've got a syntax error. Right here. We're going to indent all these and give us an end. Still lets us lock it in. So that is telling me that this one is getting pressed, right? Because yeah, it's advancing us after we've dropped something. and we are not off grid. Now we should actually be off grid by the time we pick up those stones. Let's see. Yeah, we are off grid. So for some reason we're becoming off grid true. Or we are off grid. If we are off grid and we've dropped something, see, we can't do that. We can't do that. What am I missing? If we're not off grid, which we weren't, and we dropped a movement, okay, I mean, yeah, this is wrong because we were off grid. Oh, you know what? Off grid should be equal to true until we falsify it here. So off grid only gets true unless we do this. But I believe we're doing that in the previous movement event. Oh, come on. Give me a break. I believe in movement event 3, yeah, we're right here. We're asking for our next move's illegal, which since our next move is a maximum. Oh, see, this is the problem. Well, we're asking if it's 14 occupant. So let's see our next move grid stuff. See, we need to become off grid true, not if only all this stuff, but if it's like we need to pass in another parameter that says we're trying to swap off grid to true if the mouse stones occupants in our hands plus the occupants of whatever grid we're about to go into, so our next move row and our next move column, because at this point we're already locked in there, and if our stones plus those stones are greater than 14, then that is actually an off-grid true. So now I'm hoping off-grid will actually get true at that point, and maybe that will prevent the crash. So on page 3 of our debugging, we have off-grid as false. Now as soon as we lock this in, it should be true, and it is. So now we can't lock in dropping 1 stone, we can't lock in dropping 2 stones, can't lock in dropping 3 stones, can't lock in dropping 4, and when we drop all 5 and then press enter, it switches. So that's all well and good, except let's test if we had not a 14 stack. Let's say we had a 12 stack. We should be able to carry over 2 stones into that next grid. So let's see if that's possible. So off grid will get true until, see, here's the problem. We're still off grid true. So anytime we drop a stone, we need to run this off-grid function again. But this is where it gets messy because we're doing multiple things in this off-grid function. Where's our next? Oh, come on, where is it? Oh, Jesus. It's next move off grid here. So yeah, it's like we need another function that's called, See, either we need to split this up and use another variable than off-grid, or we need to pull this out into a different function, which I'm leaning into pulling it out into a different function because we don't want to do too many things in one function. So let's give us a new function called, instead of nextMoveOffGrid, which is what it would be determining, we would just say nextMove. You know what? We already got nextMoveIllegal, so maybe we just add this here. We check two things. We check our nextMoveRow, nextMoveColumn, and it's better to do it here instead of here because if we call this function again, we're going to be updating this nextMoveRow. But I guess we don't actually. It would be fine, but we would be doing unnecessary arithmetic every time. So maybe just, let's see if nextMoveIllegal. And the thing is, we can't just say otherwise off-grid is false in this scenario. So maybe we say if nextMoveRow is greater than 1, smaller than 5. This actually doesn't make any sense to me. If our nextMoveRow is greater than 1, like a 2, our nextMoveRow smaller than a 5, so it's 2, 3, or 4, and we're 2, 3, or 4 on the column. I'm actually really confused at what that's doing. I feel like we don't even need it. God damn it, I don't know what to do. Let's just leave it as is because it's working, but let me see if we can run this again. But the thing is, it's fine to get off grid true, but we need to set it to false, if not necessarily if we're not. Like we can't just put an else off grid gets false here because there's other factors determining whether or not we're off grid. So we would only do this if what? If our next move row is greater than 0. See, this is what I feel like the above should be. Let me just, I really think this is wrong. But not exactly sure. We're gonna put this, I'm gonna say if this is greater than 0, smaller than, no, hold on, what is this even doing? Is totally jacked. When do we run this next move illegal? We do it when we pick up stones in our movement 3. No, not picking up, when we select our first movement grid. So next move illegal should swap off grid to true if that next move Yeah, I think this is just totally jacked. I don't think we need this at all. I think we can just say we literally ask our next move row and column. Okay, so I think we had that so it wouldn't have crashed. So because if our next move row, but then again, if we look at when we assign our next move row and column, it's up here and we only do it see, because it's like if we're like, let's say we're grid 1, 2, first row, second column, and we lock in a left direction. At that point, when we click on that first grid 1, 1 and lock that in a movement event 3, it should be asking, once it calls this next move illegal, it should be saying, well, it actually calls the next move off grid first, which updates our next move row. And then if our next move row is off grid, we become off grid true. But then we're saying next move illegal, and we're asking to index into that move, next move row and next move column. But we can't evaluate this, we'll crash in Lua if that is a index of an occupant that isn't instantiated, which it would be if off-grid is true. So I think if we're not off-grid true, then we can go ahead and run this next move illegal function, and that's going to test for not off-grid status, but if it's going to check capstone and standing stone status. And it's going to check occupants plus that occupant's status. So we need to only run this function if we're not off grid, I'm pretty sure. So if not off grid, then go ahead and determine whether or not we really are off grid based on our occupants, not based on our grid status. And then we can kind of do, so the problem is we were off grid, but as soon as we drop stones, we need to ask this again. So like when we drop a stone, we need to ask we would actually just run this function, and at that time, this dropstone function will update our occupants, our grid occupants, right here, this occupants field of occupants, and it would update our mouse stone occupants, which would then, we would able to use those fields in this function and determine if off-grid really should get set to true again. And I feel like we need to run it when we pick up stones too, because we need to get I think that'll exactly fix it, but let's see if it at least toggles to off-grid true once we drop enough stones. So we've got 12, we can fit 2 stones in there. So if we look at off-grid, we are off-grid, but as soon as we drop a stone, as soon as we drop the next stone, it should be off-grid gets false. And it is not. So off-grid is not getting false in that movement event, even though we're calling that function, and that function is asking for our occupants. Oh, this should get off-grid. Wait. No, yeah, it should get true. our occupants is greater than. We need to set our off-grid to false if we have less stones in our hand. If we have stones in our hand that we could actually place without going over our max stone limit. So if we lock in that, we're off-grid true because we have too many stones to fit in here. But once we drop stones, as soon as I drop this next stone, we're in off-grid false, which means if we hit enter, we can in fact lock in our next grid, and we can dump those 2 stones there and advance our position. So that's it. So we just need to mimic that for every movement event and then make sure there's no crashes in any unforeseen scenarios. Because if we lock in this, can't lock in no stones, can't lock in 1 stone, can't lock in 2 stones, can lock in 2 stones in hand, not 2 stones dropped. And then we can actually go over a 14 stack, which is cool. I think that's working. Now, let me test something. Here's a sneaky thing that could break or not. So we're off-grid true because we have too many stones. We're off-grid false if we have enough stones to not pass our next limit by the time we lock in our next move. And then when I pick up enough, we can't lock them again. So it does switch back to off-grid true. So that's telling me that it's probably working right. So this was the kind of magic sauce here, was in our nextMoveIllegal, we're not only checking for capstone status, which we actually undo by the time we lock in our stones, but that's okay. We had to also do it based on our occupants in our hand. So it's looking like it's right. It's acting like it's right. So now all we have to do is kind of mimic the flow of an enter press from that movement event and make sure that we do things correctly. It's just so silly. Like, all we gotta do is make sure we implement everything perfectly and it'll work. But yeah. So we don't do it here because we've got this capstone crush function which searches all of our orthogonal grids, but movement event 3 and onward is different because once we lock in our direction, we no longer have a choice which direction to move. We just have the option forced from us using the off-grid boolean on many different occasions. If we're off-grid, it's not going to let us drop any more stones. It's going to make us drop all of them in that current grid. If our next stones plus, or if our milestone occupants plus our next movement's occupants is greater than 14, it's going to make us drop all of those stones in that grid. And then if it's a capstone or standing stone, it's also going to prevent us from doing that, with one exception. If we only have one mouse stone occupant and that stone control is a capstone, and the current stone control, the current grid stone control is a standing stone, then we can enable a capstone crush, or a standing stone crush. Yeah, we've been calling it capstone crush because that's been doing the crushing, but lay stone crush, or standing stone crush, is actually what gets crushed, which we still haven't implemented in code. We've got the functionality right, but we don't switch the stone type as of yet, but I'm not worried about that. I just wanted to get it working first. Okay. So if we look at what we did that made it right, what was screwing us was we didn't do it in else if statements, because we would set something and then it would go to the next if statement, even though it's the same frame enter was pressed, and that was just screwing things up. So we locked the flow inside of an else if, an if else if, and the first thing we check is occupants for 0. Second thing we do is check for that capstone crush. Third thing we do is check if we have dropped any amount of stones in that grid to advance us. So we can just mimic this in a similar way. So if we look, the first thing we're checking is if we switch players, right? If we switch players with an occupants of 0. So when we press enter, instead of asking if we're off grid, we're going to be firstly checking if we have occupant 0, and if so, we swap. Then we check for the capstone crush, which is the same thing we did up here. Else if. Now we check for the capstone crush, and the capstone crush can only happen if we're off grid, because that's how the code is. A standing stone would make us off grid. So in a movement event 5, we can now say if off grid, then this would be else if off grid. Okay, this is our capstone crush, so we're checking if we have one occupant and the stone control is a capstone. And then we're swapping our off-grid to become false if that's the case, so we can actually click on that space to dump our capstone and crush it. And then we check if we've dropped some stones. So we've got drop all of our stones, a capstone crush, else if this, we don't need this because we already asked that. And then if we've dropped any in our second movement, lock in that second movement. Now we need to remember to do our function of nextMoveIllegal upon a drop and a pickup of a stone in this movement event 5. So we'll just make sure we do that. And now we can test whether or not our next example is working. So we can give us this whole stack, not at 2, 3, but at 2, 2. And now we can test. Come on. We've got, we need, no? I don't know where we're missing an end. The debugging doesn't give much help. It just says we're missing an end. Something in movement event 5, right? End. Oh. We don't need to end. Wait. Yeah, we do. I don't know where we're missing it. Right here. Yeah, right here. No, we're not, because this is an else if. It's just that this is indented wrong. Okay. Let's try that. It wasn't indented wrong. I was reading it wrong. Okay. Now. Okay. We are off-grid true because 12 stones plus our 4 stones would be higher than our 14 stack. But if we drop in 2 stones here, we're off-grid false, meaning we can lock in our next move. We can drop those 2 stones, or we can only drop in 1. We haven't done that movement event 6 yet, so let's not test that yet. But I think it's, oh, come on. I think we're okay. I think we're okay there. We crashed because we were in the next movement event, which had been doing wrong things, but we haven't fixed it yet. So let's go on to, we don't need this capstone crush comment. Okay. So let's move on to movement event 6. Now we need to remember to run our next move illegal in this case. And we need to do a couple of things. See, this is so jacked. We don't want to be doing this just yet. We want to ask. See, it's like it doesn't matter whether or not we're off grid or not. When we have 0 occupants, we press enter. It really doesn't, because we're just swapping players at that point. So I'm just gonna start with that one. And we're gonna say enter's pressed. First thing you do is check if we have 0 occupants. And if we do, we switch players. Then the next thing we do is what? We ask for the capstone crush, so we ask if we're off grid, then we do the capstone crush. Yep. But this needs to be in an else if, so we'll put this right here, else if off grid, then we need to become not off grid in a capstone crush. We can get rid of this because we already do it for an occupants of 0. And then if we have dropped any amount of stones and we are not off grid, then go ahead and move on to our next movement event. And then we don't check the next move for illegal status because we're at the end at that point. So let's see if what we did last time will now not crash. So we're off grid, true, because we have too many stones. But if we get enough stones, because now that we have 2 in our hand, 2 plus our 12 is still at our limit, so not over our limit. So if we were to lock in 2, we can dump 2 and lock in our move. Now let's see if we can only dump 1 and pass over it. We cannot. So something's going on. Let's see what movement event that is. I thought we would have fixed that with what we did, but so here we're a movement event 6. So if enter is pressed and we still have, let's see our off grid status. Off grid is false, so we should be able to move into the next grid. This gets even more confusing when we realize that we have to ask what our next grid is. No, actually, our next move illegal should be handling that. So how come is it in a movement event 6 we press enter, we crash, and we crash at a next move illegal? So I think it has something to do with if we take a look at our next move illegal, it's okay. So what we need to do is we need to not call our next move off grid. No. See, that's because what's happening is we lock in our 1 stone in our hand, which would then lock in our fourth movement, at which point I think what's happening is it's running this next move illegal, and then it's seeing that our next move would get incremented to a current grid minus a 1, which would be a index of 0, which isn't in our table, which is why it's crashing. So if we take a look at our movement event 5 or 6, it was 6. If enter is pressed, I think we don't want to run our... See, it's like we do... I think we don't want to run our next move illegal in this case, because there isn't a next move. Once we lock in our fourth movement, there isn't a next move. We just have to dump our stones. So I think we don't need to run that. So let's see if that fixes us. We're able to do it. We're able to do it. Now just for making me want to pull my hair out, what happens if there's a standing stone on the other side of that thing? We couldn't lock in stones because our off-grid was true. So we can take 2 in, but oh, fuck. See, that's wrong. So we need to figure out why that is doing that. So if we take a look at our off-grid, we're off-grid true until we have enough stones that can fit. But then here, off-grid is false, even though our next move is a standing stone. So this is because we're overriding our off-grid true with our next move illegal function by the time we're dropping stones. So we need to add to our dropping stones, be like, hey, by the way, if our next move stone control is a standing stone, by the way, off-grid is true now. No, I don't think that'll affect that won't affect our capstone crush because we're asking it explicitly before we do anything else. So as long as we go to our next move illegal and we add another case where we say if the grid at our next move row, next move column, if that grid dot stone control is equal to 2 things, a standing stone or a capstone, then we are actually off-grid true again. Now we do this already up here. Yeah, we've already done this. So maybe we do this. We just do this after. So I could have just moved this. So we do this after, because if we're technically allowed to move a stone into the next space, we would get off-grid false, but that would overwrite the off-grid based on stone control. So if we switch the order like that, I'm hoping it'll work. So now let's put a standing stone there. Let's carry this into it. Now we can't lock it in because we have too many stones, but if we drop 1 more, we can lock it in. Then if we drop 1 more and then hit enter, yes, we're not able to go to that next stone because we are actually in off-grid true. And then we can dump our last stone, lock it in, and we're good. Now, it should be the same with a standing stone. That's great, man. That's great. That's exactly what I need. That is exactly what I need. Cool, man. That's it. Yep, and I can't lock it in. Cool. Now, just to check another scenario, let's see if we put our stack on an edge. So let's put this at, let's say, 1, 2, and let's put ours at 2 column, maybe 3. Let's test this. So we can lock it in. We can't lock in this many stones because it's illegal to carry that many into, but we can carry 2 stones into it. Here we go. Here's another way it crashes. So if we dump all our stones there, we're fine. If we dump all but 1 stone, we crash, or all but 2 stones, we crash. Now, why is this crashing? It's because in our next move illegal, I feel like we're not calling this next move illegal if we're not off grid. Let's see. If we're not off grid, we're calling it here, but then we call it, I feel like we need to call it, because it crashes upon enter, but that could mean it crashes in the next movement event. But I think we want to only ask this next move illegal if we're not currently off grid. But I think that might break stuff. It might solve one crash, but it might cause another. Let's just see. Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. Okay, we're gonna only do this if we're not off grid. So let's check this movement event 4 when we press enter, if that will crash now. So still crash. Was that a movement event 4? Yeah. So why is that? Why do we crash there? And we crash on next move illegal. So something's going on where look at our next move illegal function. We need to not ask these if these aren't a, I think this is what I was getting behind when I added that weird code that didn't make sense to me. But I think I know the reason. I mean, I think I knew the reason, it just looked wrong to me. But I think we were implementing it wrong, because we only want to ask these things if our next move row is greater than or equal to 1, and our next move row is smaller than or equal to 5, and our next move column is greater than or equal to 1. and our next move column is smaller than or equal to 5. That should prevent the crashing of that index, that nil index. Hopefully. Let's see if it does. So lock it in, take 2 stones over, and if we hit enter as if to bring another one over, it doesn't take it. Yet when we have 0, it'll end the turn. So that's looking right. That's looking right. Let's move our tester 1 below. So we'll test that next movement event and make sure the same scenario. Nice. It's not crashing, man. We'll move it 1 more. Test that one out. Okay, so what if we have a 13 stack there? Will it force us to take 1? So I can't lock in 2, but it'll let us lock in 1. So now's the moment of truth. I'm going to switch it back to not an edge case, and we'll see if it still works. So we'll go 2, 2, and then we'll go 2, 4. Let's test that. Can't lock it in because we have too many stones. Can't lock it in, too many stones. Can't lock it in, too many stones. But we can take 1. Cool. Now, let's see if we have 12. Let's go down. Let's actually check a going rightwards. So we'll put this 12 stack at, let's say, 4 and 4. And then we'll put us at 4 and 2. And then we'll test us being locked by a capstone and make sure that we can't even take extra stones over. Okay, it's looking right. I'm thinking, so here's what I really want to test, I think. Well, actually, yeah, I think it'll work. Because I think if we put, like, let's say we put a 10 stack there. Well, let's say we put a 12 stack, meaning we can only dump 2. I'm gonna see if it'll force us. Yeah. I think it works. I think it works. Yeah, it won't let us lock it in. If we're blocked either off grid or capstone or standing stone. That's huge. That's huge. That was the whole headache I've been dealing with the past 2 episodes. We somehow just kind of flew through it and fixed it. Nice. I'm proud of that. Take a look at our git diff here. We'll see. We fixed our nextMoveIllegal function to incorporate off-grid getting false as well. We swapped the order so we don't accidentally overwrite a standing stone legal move or off-grid. Then we only ask nextMoveIllegal in a movement event 3 if we're not off-grid. I think that makes sense. And then we fixed all of our movement event logic to be in else if blocks on our enter presses. And then we use our nextMoveIllegal function upon dumping and picking up a stone. And it's working now. So next episode, we're going to be actually implementing the stone type change for a capstone crush, which I'm thinking shouldn't take very long at all. And then at that point, we can go ahead and retest our code, trying to do an entire game and trying to see if we crash anywhere. And before we do that, we should probably actually just do some stress testing of some unique scenarios like we were doing at the end of today's episode. Just do some weird stress testing, making sure that nothing breaks. Like, you know, dropping stones, picking up stones, locking in moves, having weird scenarios where our next grid has lots of occupants, because we're actually, you know, one thing I think would crash it is if the stone behind a huge stone has an occupants. Actually, I feel like our next move grid might actually fix that. Our next move illegal might actually fix that, but that's something we're gonna have to test to get it bulletproof, because we don't want it to crash on people when they're playing. So we'll try to do that, as well as implement that capstone crush function. So I'm gonna get add everything to the staging area, commit message saying added what do we say? Fixed movement events. Considering next move illegal. And we'll get pushed that bad boy. And then, yeah, call it a day. I've got to go. I'm going to go see Dungeons and Dragons with the lady tonight. So, good episode, and I'll see you guys tomorrow, and we'll get more stuff done.